Trump presidency, protests turn violent in Portland, Oregon. A second night of protests in the U.S. against President-elect Donald Trump has turned violent in Portland, Oregon. Several thousand demonstrators gathered in the center of the western city. Some smashed shop and car windows, threw firecrackers and set rubbish alight. Police declared a riot and arrested 29 people. Protests in other U.S. cities were smaller than on Wednesday. Mr. Trump earlier said in a tweet the demonstrations were unfair and had been incited by the media. The protesters, mainly young people, say a Trump presidency would create deep divisions along racial and gender lines. Police in Portland accused some demonstrators of carrying bats and arming themselves with rocks. Objects were thrown at the police, who responded with pepper spray and rubber baton rounds. The state of Oregon voted 51 to 41% in favor of Democrat Hillary Clinton in Tuesday's election. Mr. Trump criticized the protesters after his meeting with President Barack Obama at the White House. Senior Trump advisor and former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani called protesters on college campuses a bunch of spoiled crybabies on Fox News. Mr. Giuliani, who has been mentioned as Mr. Trump's possible attorney general, was responding to the suggestion that students suffering anxiety over the election result were being offered therapy. There were no reports of violence at the other protests, although demonstrators in Minneapolis briefly blocked an interstate highway in both directions. In Philadelphia, crowds gathered near City Hall holding placards bearing slogans such as "Not Our President," "Trans Against Trump," and "Make America Safe for All." In Baltimore, police said a peaceful crowd of 600 people marched through the city, blocking traffic. In San Francisco, high school students waved rainbow banners and Mexican flags. A small crowd also gathered outside Trump Tower in Chicago, a day after thousands marched through the city center. Some passers-by cheered them, but at least one driver shouted that they should shut up and accept democracy. The Associated Press news agency reported. Protesters also returned to Trump Tower in New York for a second night. Meanwhile, Mexico's president said he was optimistic his country could have a positive relationship with the U.S. under Mr. Trump, despite his anti-Mexican rhetoric during the campaign. Enrique Peña Nieto said he and Trump had agreed to meet, possibly during the transition period before Mr. Trump's inauguration in January. In Russia, President Putin's spokesman said Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin were very much alike in how they see the world. Dmitry Peskov said Russian experts had been in contact with some members of Mr. Trump's staff during the campaign, but he said the Russian government had nothing to do with the theft of emails from the Democratic campaign that were later published by the transparency organization WikiLeaks.